What if you had to live two lives, one perfect, one broken? What if you loved two people at once, each one unaware of the other, carefully balancing your secrets, but knowing, deep down, the truth can only stay hidden for so long? This is the story of Sarah. She thought she could juggle it all. Two loves. Two lives. No one would ever know. But everything changes in a single moment when the two worlds collide. Imagine receiving a message from the person you thought was your secret, as the one you love stands just a few feet away, questioning everything. Can she lie her way out of this, or is the truth finally catching up with her? In the next few minutes, you'll watch Sarah's carefully constructed world crumble, betrayal, guilt, and the fallout of living a lie. But the real question is, what will happen when she has to face the consequences of losing everything she ever cared about? Sarah grinned as she packed a small overnight bag, carefully checking her phone to make sure she'd confirmed her arrival with both of her partners. With Jason, she'd sent a quick "can't wait to see you this weekend, love" text, confirming her weekend arrival in his quiet, seaside town. He responded with his usual warmth, a promise to pick her up at the train station and a reminder to bring her favorite book. With Noah, she'd already woven the story of her business trip to the coast for a long weekend. She knew he'd text her later with his usual "miss you already" line, which she'd respond to in kind. To most people, this arrangement might seem exhausting or even risky, but to Sarah, it was a carefully balanced life, one she was proud to have created and nurtured. Each man brought out something different in her, filled a space the other couldn't quite reach. Jason was steady, quiet, and reliable. With him, she felt grounded, soothed by the slow pace of life in his small town. He encouraged her to take long walks, talk about her dreams, and appreciate the peaceful beauty of the world. Noah, on the other hand, was the opposite, spontaneous, city-bound, full of big dreams and louder laughter. With him, Sarah felt alive, drawn to the fast pace of their lives together. He made her feel daring, like the kind of person who could do anything, and she'd been careful. Jason and Noah were as different as the worlds they inhabited, and she took great pains to keep them separate. Her phone was clean, her social media carefully curated to reflect only what she wanted each to see. She kept two wallets, two routines, two lives. Friends in Jason's town never met friends from Noah's. Jason's family didn't know her last name, and she avoided Noah's gatherings where introductions to close friends or family might bring up probing questions. Her heart, Sarah had decided, was big enough to handle it all. That weekend, she settled into Jason's cozy car, and as they drove along the winding road to his house, she felt that same quiet warmth wash over her. It was their ritual, the drive, the dinners he'd planned, the long, lingering mornings over coffee. Each time they were together, she allowed herself to feel as if this was her life, as if she were committed to the peace and stability he provided. But she knew that come Monday, she'd be back in the city with Noah, invigorated by his energy and his confidence. Once settled in Jason's little cottage, she slipped into the weekend rhythm, long walks with him, evenings curled up on the couch, Sunday morning hikes. As she watched him brew their coffee, humming to himself in the quiet of his kitchen, she felt a pang, a sharp, momentary stab of guilt. He didn't know her life outside of this, he didn't see the other parts of her heart she kept hidden. But the guilt was fleeting, chased away by her certainty that she could keep everything in its place. After all, Jason never asked questions, never prodded. And Noah, well, Noah thrived on mystery, uninterested in her past or her quieter moments. As the weekend wound down, Sarah savored those last moments of stillness with Jason, locking them away in her mind for when she'd return to her other life. She assured herself that she'd balanced both worlds so well for so long that nothing could slip through the cracks. In a way, she believed she could be everything to both of them, somehow staying whole within the split pieces of her life. Packing up on Sunday night, Sarah gave Jason a long, lingering hug goodbye, feeling the tug as she left him behind for her city life with Noah. She didn't know it yet, but there were small threads unraveling beneath her perfect surface, invisible and slowly untangling. As Sarah settled back into her city life with Noah on Monday morning, she felt a familiar sense of relief, like slipping back into a second skin. The weekend with Jason had been wonderful, as it always was, yet leaving him felt like breathing out after holding her breath. In the city, life moved faster, louder, and she could sink into the rhythm with Noah, where the thrill of their plans and nights out drowned any lingering quiet she'd left behind in Jason's town. They met for coffee that afternoon, Noah striding into their favorite spot with his usual grin. He wrapped her in a hug, holding her close as he murmured, "Missed you." For a moment, she wondered if he'd noticed how she'd been gone longer than her business trip required, but his mind seemed already set on other things. "Sarah, you'll never believe this," he said, eyes bright. "We've got tickets to the expo this weekend. 2 VIP passes." Sarah froze, forcing a smile. The expo, one of the biggest annual events for city creatives, was something she'd always dreamed of attending with him. But her plans with Jason were already set. She was supposed to take the train Friday morning for his sister's engagement party. The weekend promised family gatherings, homemade dinners, and quiet mornings. Canceling now would raise questions she wasn't sure she could answer. "Oh, Noah, that's incredible," she said, hoping her voice sounded excited. "I'd love to go." But her mind raced, searching for a way to break off her plans with Jason without suspicion. As the week went on, she felt a subtle shift in Noah's mood, as if he were picking up on her distracted thoughts. A few times, he'd commented lightly on how much she was away for work lately. She laughed it off, reminding him of the big project she was supposedly working on with a client in Jason's town. It had been her go-to excuse, and he'd never questioned it until recently. She could feel his curiosity building, see the shadow in his eyes when she mentioned another business trip. This used to be easy, she thought. He used to believe everything I said. The first time they'd started dating, it had been carefree. She remembered how they'd once spent nearly every night out, hopping from one spot to another. Noah didn't even ask her about her life outside their time together. He'd laugh at her mysterious weekends, even teasing her playfully about her double life before brushing it off. But now, with almost a year into their relationship, Noah seemed to want more than spontaneous nights and mystery. He talked about meeting her friends, even making introductions to his family. She could feel the walls closing in. With Jason, it was even harder. When she'd first met him 2 years ago, he'd taken everything she offered at face value. Unlike Noah's intensity, Jason was steady, dependable, his warmth a soothing balm she'd needed back then. She'd come out of a rough breakup and had found herself in Jason's small town for a work project, where he'd been kind and gentle, a safe place to land. And she had been more open with him in those early days, sharing details of her life in a way she hadn't felt safe doing with anyone in years. Jason had been the first person she'd let see her vulnerability, but now, each weekend away seemed more like an illusion, built on her ability to keep him happy with half-truths and guarded silences. Thursday night came too soon. She hadn't worked out how to handle the expo versus the engagement party, but she'd settled on a vague excuse to Jason, work emergency, maybe next weekend. She dialed his number, rehearsing her lines in her head, knowing she needed to sound convincing. "Hey, Jace," she said when he picked up, trying to keep her tone light. "Something's come up with work, I might not be able to make it tomorrow after all." There was a pause. "Again?" His voice was calm, but she heard the faint trace of disappointment. "Yeah, I know. I'm so sorry. I really wanted to be there for your sister." She forced a sigh, hoping it sounded sincere. "It's just, they're asking me to stay and help with this last-minute presentation. It's important. You've had to cancel a lot lately," he said quietly. "I mean, I get it, you're busy. But you didn't used to be away so much." Sarah felt a flicker of panic. Jason wasn't usually one to question her. His acceptance of her often vague stories had been the cornerstone of their relationship. She'd relied on that, on his easygoing nature. Now, she wondered if her pattern of business trips was finally raising doubts. "Jason," she said, trying to sound reassuring, "you know my job is crazy sometimes. It's not that I don't want to be with you, it's just complicated." He let out a small sigh. "Yeah, I know. I just feel like I haven't seen you much lately. And I want you to meet my family, to be a part of everything." "I know, and I want that too," she replied quickly. "We'll make it happen, I promise." When they hung up, Sarah felt her chest tighten with the familiar weight of guilt. Jason's sincerity, his willingness to wait for her despite all her absences, gnawed at her, but she brushed it aside. She couldn't give up Noah, couldn't give up the life she'd built with him, even if balancing both lives was beginning to take a toll. The next day, she was at the expo with Noah, standing in a crowded room full of music, art, and the buzz of excited people. Noah held her hand, guiding her through the crowds, introducing her to friends and colleagues. She laughed along, mingling effortlessly, enjoying the thrill of the city scene. But as they moved through the room, her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from Jason, a simple issue that made her stomach drop. She glanced over at Noah, hoping he hadn't noticed her momentary distraction, but his eyes were on her, sharper than she'd expected. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice casual but tinged with curiosity. "Yeah, just work stuff," she replied quickly, slipping her phone back into her pocket with a practiced smile. But for the first time, Noah didn't let it slide. He raised an eyebrow, his hand still resting on her arm. "You know, you're on your phone a lot lately," he said, laughing lightly but watching her closely. "Sometimes I wonder what's going on with these business trips of yours." Sarah's breath caught. "Oh, come on," she joked, trying to sound light-hearted. "You know I'm always glued to my phone." "Maybe," he replied, but his gaze lingered, thoughtful. "But sometimes it feels like there's more to it." For the first time, Sarah felt the weight of her choices bearing down on her. The careful balance she'd maintained was slipping, one small, telling crack at a time. And for the first time, she feared that it wouldn't be long before everything came crashing down. Certainly. Here's the next segment, where Sarah faces pressure from both Jason and Noah, each wanting more from her and putting her in a difficult spot. 2 weeks had passed since the expo, and Sarah could feel both her lives colliding in ways she hadn't expected. Each time she thought she'd smoothed things over, a new challenge would emerge, forcing her to juggle more carefully than ever before. Both Jason and Noah were making it harder to maintain her web of stories, and she was beginning to feel trapped, pulled in 2 directions. It started with Jason's text one Wednesday morning: "Sarah, my mom was asking if you'll be joining us for her birthday next month. She's looking forward to finally meeting you." It was a straightforward request, but Sarah's heart sank. Jason's mother's birthday was in just a few weeks, and she could hardly skip another visit without raising Jason's suspicions. Her usual excuses were running thin. Later that day, Noah surprised her with a conversation she hadn't seen coming. Over dinner, he reached for her hand, his eyes steady as he spoke. "Sarah, I think we should move in together." He smiled, clearly excited. "I mean, I'm tired of seeing you run off to your place all the time, and I'd love to just wake up next to you every day." Her fork froze mid-air as her mind scrambled for a response. Noah had always been independent, never asking for more than she was able to give. But now he was looking at her with that openness, a vulnerability she wasn't used to. And it terrified her. That's a big step," she stammered, forcing a smile. "I didn't realize you were ready for that." "I am," he said softly, his fingers tightening around hers. "I love you, Sarah. And I think it's time we start building something more, you know?" Panic flared within her. She couldn't possibly move in with Noah, not with her life in pieces like this. Her weekends with Jason would be nearly impossible to manage, and she'd have to tell more lies than she'd ever imagined just to keep Noah from suspecting anything. "Can we just take a little time to think about it?" she asked, her voice sounding more hesitant than she'd intended. "I just need to wrap my head around it." Noah's smile faded slightly, but he nodded. "Of course. I don't want to rush you. But I hope you'll consider it, Sarah. I want this to work." The rest of the evening passed in a blur, but as she lay in bed that night, Sarah felt the weight of her choices pressing down harder than ever. She could sense that both Jason and Noah were waiting for her to make a decision, to commit to one life or the other. And for the first time, she wasn't sure she could keep them both at bay. With her heart pounding, she realized she was standing at a crossroads, where every path seemed filled with complications she was no longer sure she could handle. Certainly. Here's the next part, where Sarah's 2 lives start to converge dangerously, and she faces her biggest challenge yet in trying to keep everything under control. The strain of keeping her double life had begun taking its toll on Sarah. Her once flawless juggling act now felt increasingly chaotic, with each excuse or cancelled plan teetering on the edge of suspicion. She told herself that everything would hold together, that her careful web of stories would keep Jason and Noah from finding out, but she couldn't deny it, things were unraveling. One Thursday afternoon, as she was packing for another weekend with Jason, a notification lit up her phone. It was from Noah, but the message wasn't one she'd expected. "Hey, just booked my tickets to surprise you. Can't wait to spend the weekend together." Should be at your place by 7 p.m. tomorrow. Her heart stopped. Noah was coming to see her. She had no backup story prepared, no quick excuse she could pull out. He had no idea that she'd already promised Jason she'd be arriving at his place that very evening. Frantically, Sarah tapped out a response. *, Noah, that's so sweet. But I've been called out of town for work again. I'll be leaving in a couple hours. *. There was a long pause before Noah replied, and her heart hammered as she stared at the screen, waiting for the message to appear. Finally, it came through. Again? Sarah, come on. This is the 4th time in a month. You're hardly ever around anymore. She could almost feel his disappointment through the screen, and it twisted painfully in her chest. For a moment, she wanted to tell him everything, to confess how much she cared for him and explain the tangled mess she'd made. But instead, she took a deep breath and sent another message, telling him she'd make it up to him soon. But the sinking feeling didn't leave her. That night, as she settled in at Jason's place, he greeted her with his usual warmth, pulling her close and kissing her gently. For a while, Sarah allowed herself to relax, letting Jason's calm, steady presence lull her into a sense of security. She told herself she could figure everything out when she got back to the city, but just after dinner, Jason's phone buzzed with a notification. He glanced at the screen, then did a double-take, frowning. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with sudden anxiety. "It's nothing, probably," Jason murmured, but his eyes were fixed on his phone. I saw a photo of you on someone else's feed. Looked like it was posted today, but it's tagged at a cafe in the city." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She'd met Noah for coffee earlier that day, and one of his friends had snapped a picture without her realizing it. "Jason, that's so old," she laughed, forcing herself to keep a steady voice. Someone must have tagged the location wrong, but Jason's expression didn't change. "Sarah, I've noticed things lately. You've been distant. Always busy with work, always needing to leave." Her chest tightened, her mind scrambling for a way out. "Jason, are you seeing someone else?" he asked, his voice so quiet it almost broke her heart. In that moment, the wall she'd so carefully built around herself began to collapse. Jason's gaze didn't waver, and she knew that her response would shape everything that happened next. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Time seemed to stretch, and the room suddenly felt impossibly small. Jason's gaze was unwavering, a mixture of hurt and suspicion clouding his eyes. Her mind raced, each thought more panic than the last. She hadn't expected him to confront her like this, not yet, not so soon. But here it was. The question she had feared more than anything. "Are you seeing someone else?" The weight of his words crashed over her, and her heart twisted painfully. The truth was so much more complicated than a simple yes or the no. She wasn't just seeing someone else, she was leading 2 separate lives, each more fragile than the last. And now, the fragile walls she had so carefully constructed around those lives were crumbling. Her throat was dry, and she could feel the heat rising in her chest as she struggled to form a response. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She wanted to say something, to deny it, to explain. But the truth was so much worse than anything she could come up with on the spot. Jason didn't wait for her to speak. His eyes darkened with a mix of disbelief and pain. "I've been patient, Sarah. I've been understanding. But this is too much." She stood frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had spent so much time carefully curating this double life, stitching together the lies and excuses until they felt real. But they weren't real. None of it was real. "Jason, her voice faltered as she tried to gather her thoughts, but nothing seemed to make sense. How could she possibly explain the tangled mess of her emotions? How could she justify what she had done? He shook his head slowly, disappointment written all over his face. "How long, Sarah? How long have you been lying to me?" She could feel the walls closing in around her, and the suffocating reality of her choices crushed her chest. Noah, Jason, she had never intended for it to go this far. She had told herself she could manage it, that she could keep it all separate. But now, everything was colliding, and there was no escape. "I never meant to hurt you," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't want it to get this far." Jason stepped back, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Then why didn't you tell me the truth? Why didn't you just tell me you weren't ready? You've been shutting me out for weeks, and now I find out this. Tears burned in Sarah's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She couldn't cry now, not with everything hanging in the balance. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could keep everything together by lying to me? Jason's voice was colder now, the warmth he had once shared with her replaced by something sharp, something final. I'm sorry, she said, the words coming out in a rush. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to lose you. But I couldn't let go of him either. Jason took a deep breath, his shoulders stiff with anger and frustration. And what about me? What about us? Was any of it real, Sarah? Her heart shattered as she met his gaze. She had been so afraid of this moment, of having her world fall apart. But it wasn't just the fear of being caught, it was the realization that she had lost herself in the process. She had built a life of lies and deceit to avoid facing the truth, to avoid facing the reasons she kept running away from commitment. I don't know, she whispered, her voice breaking. Jason's face softened for a brief moment, but it quickly hardened again. He turned away, walking toward the door. I can't do this, Sarah. I can't be with someone who can't even be honest with me. I thought I knew you, but I don't think I do anymore. Before she could say another word, he was gone. The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah sank to the couch, her hands trembling in her lap. The weight of her choices, of the lives she had built and then torn apart, crashed over her like a wave. She had been living a double life, yes, but it wasn't just the deception that had shattered everything. It was the realization that she had been running from herself all along, too afraid to face the fear of commitment, of truly giving herself to someone else. As the minutes passed, the reality of the situation settled in. She had lost Jason, she had lost both of them. Her phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a message from Noah. Hey, I'm at your place. Can't wait to see you. Let me know when you're home. For a moment, Sarah stared at the message, her hands shaking. The weight of everything she had just lost pressed in on her. She couldn't go back to Noah. She couldn't lie to him anymore. She had nothing left to give. She stared at the message, and with a slow, trembling hand, she deleted it. The door had closed on one life, and the other had already been shattered. Now, Sarah was left to face the aftermath of her choices, with no one to turn to and no one to blame but herself. The days that followed Jason's departure were a blur of emptiness. Sarah wandered through her apartment, each corner a silent reminder of what had been lost. The space, once filled with laughter, warmth, and the promise of something real, now felt hollow. The walls closed in around her, pressing down on her chest as she tried to process what had just happened. She hadn't even realized how deeply she had relied on the structure of her double life until it was all gone. The chaotic juggling of Noah and Jason, the constant lies, the guilt, she had grown accustomed to it. She had told herself it was all temporary, that she could fix it once everything settled. But now, nothing was settled. Everything was in ruins. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Noah. She hadn't responded to his last text, hadn't been able to. The guilt weighed heavily in her chest, like a lead anchor pulling her down. Sarah, please talk to me. I need to know what's going on. I can't keep doing this. The words were sharp, raw with hurt. She could almost hear the desperation in his voice, see the pain that she had caused him. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the reply. But what was there to say? There was no excuse, no justification for what she had done. She couldn't keep lying to him anymore. Not after everything. With a deep sigh, Sarah put the phone down. She had no energy left for more lies. She didn't have the strength to pretend anymore. She had told herself that living a double life had been about keeping the pieces of herself intact, about feeling wanted, needed, and desired by both Jason and Noah. But now, she realized, she had been avoiding the most important piece of all, or herself. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, she stood up and walked to the door, her legs feeling like lead. When she opened it, she was met with an unexpected sight, Jason's mother, standing in the doorway, her face drawn and pale. Sarah, she said quietly, her voice trembling. I need to talk to you. Sarah's stomach twisted. She hadn't seen Jason's mother since their last visit to the family home, and she had no idea what this could be about. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice more hoarse than she intended. Jason's mother stepped inside, her eyes filled with concern. "I've been trying to reach Jason," she said, her words heavy with a mix of worry and frustration. "But he won't return my calls. I don't understand what's going on." Is he okay?" Sarah swallowed, her throat dry. She knew what this conversation was leading to. She had been part of the lie for so long, hiding the truth from Jason's family, maintaining the illusion of a perfect relationship. But now, with Jason gone, there was nothing left to hide behind. I don't know where he is," Sarah said softly, her eyes dropping to the floor. "I haven't heard from him either." Jason's mother gave her a long, searching look, her eyes flickering with a sudden suspicion. "Sarah," she said, her voice low, "what happened between you two? You need to tell me the truth." "I can't stand not knowing." Tears pricked Sarah's eyes, but she held them back. She hadn't even had a chance to come to terms with everything herself, and now she was being asked to explain it all. How could she? How could she explain the mess she had created, the destruction she had left in her wake? I lied to him," Sarah finally admitted, her voice breaking. "I didn't tell him the truth. I was seeing someone else, and I didn't know how to fix it. I thought I could keep both relationships going, but it all fell apart." Jason's mother took a step back, her face pale. "You were seeing someone else?" she asked, her voice rising in disbelief. "How could you do that to him? How could you lie to him like that?" "I never meant to hurt him," Sarah whispered. "I didn't know what I was doing. I was so scared of losing him, and then I met Noah, and I couldn't let go of either of them." The words hung heavy in the air between them. Jason's mother shook her head slowly, as if trying to process the enormity of what Sarah was saying. "Why, Sarah?" she asked quietly. "Why did you feel like you had to do this? Why couldn't you just be honest with him? He loved you. He trusted you." "I didn't know how to face it," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know how to tell him the truth. And now I've lost everything." There was a long silence. Jason's mother didn't speak, but her disappointment was palpable, settling between them like a heavy fog. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," Sarah added, tears welling up in her eyes. "But now I've hurt both of them. I've lost Jason, and I've lost Noah. And I don't even know who I am anymore." Jason's mother didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, her arms crossed, her face etched with sorrow. Finally, she let out a slow, resigned sigh. "I think you need to figure this out, Sarah. You need to take some time and figure out who you are and what you really want. Because right now, you're just running away from everything." With that, she turned and walked out the door, leaving Sarah standing in the silence of her own self-made prison. Alone once again, Sarah collapsed onto the couch, her body shaking with the weight of her guilt. She had lost Jason, she had lost Noah, and most painfully of all, she had lost herself. The wreckage of her double life was all around her. And now, for the first time, she was forced to confront the consequences of her choices. No more lies. No more running. She had to face the truth.
Thank you for watching this video. If you made it this far, please consider subscribing. I post stories like this on the regular. See you on the next one.